All right. So you watched my first video, right? And you said, oh, well, I have a tripod and I have a camera. Well, you, being the silly little goofball that you are, don't know how to use it. Well, you might know how to use your camera and tripod already, but you don't know how to use it in an astrophotography sense. And so that's what I'm gonna be going over today, is how to set up your gear and how to set up the right settings on your camera, because there's a lot that you need to know sort of before you go out and start trying to take photos, so that it's a little easier to see immediate results, so that you're not going out there blind and just shooting. But you will kind of be going out there blind because you're gonna have to be there out at night. And so this is gonna be like one of the first optional items that I throw at you. I said you just needed a tripod and camera, but I really would recommend a lamp of some sort or a flashlight. It makes it easier for people to see you and for you to see things around you, so that you can, set up all your stuff out there and possibly not get eaten by animals. So next I'll be showing you how to set up all your stuff. So, all right. So now to set up your gear. So for me, this actually took me a very long time to figure out how to actually properly use my equipment and set it up when I was first starting, because I don't really look at any of the manuals or anything like that, or like the how-to manuals. So I sort of just did it my own way, but I've realized now that, this little lever right here, I'm not supposed to ignore that. So most tripods, unless you have like a ball head tripod or anything like that, it's pretty much going to be the same thing. They'll have like a little clip right here that if you clip like this and you clip it out, a little ledge will come out and it'll have a little screw on it, right? You take your camera, it also has a little thread right there. You just thread in the screw and position it to, a place that looks right on the camera, so that you can sit it down on the tripod. You unlatch it, put it in like that, and then you latch it again. This is kind of a janky little tripod. I don't use it anymore. I'm using my actual tripod for the video, but that's basically how you set up your tripod and camera, so that you have a stable base to shoot on. If you want, you can play around with like the levels on the tripod and make it level. I personally don't really waste too much time making sure everything's level, because when you're out there in the field, you're just going to be wasting shooting time, trying to make everything level. The ground that you're shooting on is probably not going to be level. As long as everything's framed correctly, you should be fine. As a little precursor though, I'll flip this around. Hopefully you can see it. Most DSLRs on the lens will have a little switch that says AF and MF, that's autofocus and manual focus. Before you go out shooting, it's always nice to just flip it to manual focus, because everything you do in astrophotography is going to be manual. This is like probably the best hobby to get to actually know what the settings on your camera does, because you're doing everything manually. So that's sort of how you set up your tripod to get ready to go out and image. And so next I'll be going over the settings that you're going to need to know, and how you're going to need to use them for the different types of photography that you're doing. Of the video, it's gonna get a little nerdy, and I seriously advise to either have your camera out with you or a notepad to write things down. It would be best if you had both, actually, because the camera will be able to see what I'm talking about, and a notepad, you're not going to be able to remember all this. It took me like probably a couple months to like maybe half a year to actually like really nail down this topic that I'm going to be going over, and that is your camera settings. So the three main camera settings that you need to worry about with astrophotography is ISO, f-stop or aperture, and shutter speed. And so we'll start off with ISO because ISO is going to be the main change from any normal photography that you're doing. Normally in normal photography you want your ISO to be as low as possible. With astrophotography we throw that out the window. ISO basically it determines how sensitive your camera sensor is going to be to light. And so the higher ISO you have, the more sensitive it'll be, and the lower, the less sensitive. And so in astrophotography, we want as much light as possible. So usually our ISO is going to be a lot higher than a normal photographer's, which means that usually you'll be shooting at ISO 800 or over. Usually 1600 to 3200 ISO is the sweet spot. But really it depends on, you know, where you're shooting, how dark the skies are, and what object you're shooting. But typically, you know, setting your ISO at a bare minimum 800 and experimenting from there is the best way to figure out what's gonna be best for you. And so once you have your ISO dialed in, next is the aperture. Now for telescopes have a fixed aperture, so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're not shooting with a telescope and you're shooting with, say, a lens, for example, you'll have the option to change your aperture. At least if you're using like, you know, a 50 millimeter or a wide angle lens where, say, you can, you know, change the aperture from 2.8 to, you know, 4.0, blah, 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 blah. So aperture basically, it's like a little ring of blades, I guess, that open and close, and as they open and close, they let in more or less light. And so the lower the aperture, the more light you let in. And so, like with ISO, we want more light, so you're probably gonna be shooting at lower aperture if you can. If your camera goes to f2.8, you know, set it to 2.8 by all means. But there are points where your image starts to degrade a little bit if you go below it, because lenses aren't built for astrophotography. So a rule of thumb, if your camera can go to, say, you know, aperture or f-stop, you know, 1.2, just set it at 2.8. That's what I usually find is best for rounded stars and things like that. And if it can't go to 2.8, don't worry, you know, set at the lowest f-stop possible. So for some it's going to be 4.0, for telephoto lenses I think it's like 5.3, but basically just set your f-stop as low as possible, except for if you're using like a wide angle lens that can go down to like really small f-stops. That's going to let in a lot more light and prove to be a better image. And so the next is shutter speed. Shutter speed basically determines how long the shutter is going to be open and how long the photo is. And so there's a whole bunch of like rules with shutter speed, and there's like calculations that you can do to figure out how long you should do an exposure. I'm not going to get into that right now because I feel like it's better to explain it while I'm out in the field actually taking photos. So I'll do that later on today when I go out shooting. But basically for shutter speed, what you're going to want to do is we want to let in as much light as possible. Light is the name of the game in astrophotography. And so with a wide angle lens and a sturdy tripod, you can get away with anything from 15 to 30 seconds of exposure time. So we're going to be shooting pretty long exposures. Now, this will change whether you have a star tracker or not, or what type of lens you're using. The longer the focal length on the lens, the shorter exposure time you're going to have to do, because there's a thing called star trailing, which is basically the stars, not the stars, the Earth moves, which causes the stars to look like they're moving in photos. And so we have to sort of counteract that with how fast or how long we set our exposures. And so the longer your focal length, the less exposure time you're actually going to be able to pull off. And so if you're going out there with a wide angle lens, it's a little easier. You can set it at 15 to 30 seconds. 50 millimeters, you could probably get away with 10 seconds. And then anything above that, you're going to be shooting in the 5 to 1 second intervals. But I'll explain that once I get into more in depth on deep space astrophotography, which is, I would say, if you're using anything above 50 to 75 millimeters, you're getting into deep space. But that's for a video for another day. So next I'll be showing you how to focus, how to get out there and frame, and how to properly use your settings. Hopefully, if not, I might be too bogged up with working on a current project that I'm going to be out doing tonight, which is the Eagle Nebula and the Pillars of Creation. I'm hopefully going to get some good data on that. But I'm rambling. That has nothing to do with today's video. So I may or may not see you in the next clip where I show you how to focus and everything like that. Peace.